From being bullied as a kid for having a different skin color to building an African brotherhood inside the UFC, here's why Israel Adesanya hates fighting black people. It's not surprising for someone of African heritage to not want to fight his own people. And Izzy has always been pretty vocal about not wanting to fight his brothers. After all, he's dealt with racism his whole life. The Adesanya clan had a wealthy life back home in Nigeria, but they decided to migrate to New Zealand when the future champ was still very young. Stylebender has spoken about the difficulties he had adjusting to his new country because back in Nigeria, he never felt like he was different. And to make matters worse, he'd have kids point him out and even make fun of him because his skin color wasn't the same as theirs. Safe to say, Izzy had a really hard time as a young man as he tried to fit in. But as he started to grow older, he wanted to embrace his identity, which is reflected in his broken native tattoo. Adesanya is a fan of ink, which you can tell by all the artwork he has on his body. He wanted the words broken native to be written prominently on his chest as a reminder of the struggles he had to face throughout his life as he tried to fit into his country. It was all that bullying that made him want to learn martial arts in the first place, and the rest is history. Now, even though Israel feels so strongly about the issue, it's not like he's never fought anyone black. When you're fighting at such a high level, you gotta face off against the best fighters in the world. And sometimes you cross paths with someone you don't want to face. In Adesanya's case, he's fought several black fighters, and he managed to beat them all. His fight with Derek Brunson had a lot of bad blood going into the bout. The middleweight king went on to destroy his opponent and then did his signature dance moves. He also fought his idol, Anderson Silva, which was a dream fight for him. In fact, many people have called him the new Silva. And then we have the rivalry with John Jones, which never materialized into an actual fight, but the two were ready to step inside the octagon with one another. So his track record shows that in the past, he'd been willing to pick a fight with a black person even if it got personal, but he's gotten a lot more mature over the years. In the beginning, Izzy was just fighting for himself, but as time went on, he realized he had a responsibility to influence his audience. And so, the two-time undisputed champ wanted to use his platform to send the right message. That said, even though the UFC star has always been vocal about issues related to racism, he started being an activist after the BLM issues in 2020. The death of George Floyd was a very tragic incident, and it sparked a Black Lives Matter movement all over the world.
Its hometown of Houston, the police chief joined the calls for justice.
We know what? We built this country.
Adesanya took charge of a number of protests and even addressed the public. This was in the heat of COVID, and as a professional athlete, you had to be extra careful because if you caught the virus, you wouldn't have been able to compete. But that didn't stop the Nigerian-born fighter from being a part of all the rallies and walking alongside people as they tried to make their voices heard. There was one particular speech Izzy gave that went viral all over social media. As he got onto the stage, he spoke about how unfair it was that people with black skin have to endure so much. They're on the wrong side of racial profiling, police brutality, and a number of other disadvantages.
How many of you walk down the street and have to kind of smile and try and make the person who you can see is already scared of you, make them feel comfortable?
He said it's unfair because they were born that way. He didn't choose to be black, but if he'd been given a choice, he'd still be black. It's hard not to get goosebumps after hearing that. Adesanya also addressed the Kiwi people after winning a local award. The man believes in brotherhood and unity, and he wanted to send the message that even though he looks and acts a little different, he's still one of them. So the people of New Zealand shouldn't try to bring down one of their own, because when he wins, they win. This message was very well received by the audience, but not all his statements have been very peaceful, especially when he went after Colby Covington for his racial remarks. If Colby Covington hasn't personally attacked you yet, it means you're not very popular. The former interim welterweight champion likes to create chaos inside the cage and controversy outside the cage. Now, it would take a long time to talk about every single time he crossed the line, but a time that comes to mind right now is when he went after the former undisputed champ, Kamaru Usman. The two had a lot of bad blood going into their fight, and Colby disrespected Kamaru's family, culture, and ethnicity. Usman is a fellow Nigerian brother of Izzy, and the two are very close. So Adesanya was pretty upset when he heard all that. Colby also fought Tyron Woodley in 2020 as the BLM protests were taking place, and he made a lot of remarks against the protests and called everyone who supported such a cause a terrorist. After that, Izzy had no respect left for him. The entire team of City Kickboxing despises Colby, and Stylebender didn't hold back at all when it came to addressing Covington. Washington. The middleweight king said Colby's comments were flat-out racist, and it was disgusting to hear. He also pointed out the irony that Covington can get away with saying anything he wants, but when Israel made a joke about the Twin Towers, he faced some serious backlash. It just shows how the media operates, but he doesn't care too much as his fellow African had already broken the guy's jaw. Izzy refused to give Colby an immediate title shot at 185, even though it would have been a pretty huge fight. He wanted Colby to earn his stripes first by fighting some contenders. At the end of the day, it's obvious that the two-time champ loves supporting his people. However, he recently ruffled some feathers against an African fighter. In March, a South African middleweight, Dricus du Plessis, made a statement by saying he's the only real African fighter, and he singled out all the other UFC stars who say they're Africans, but since they moved to other countries, they're no longer true Africans. This sparked a lot of heat from many fighters, but Izzy and Kamaru in particular were very vocal in their responses. Adesanya thought that it was a very stupid thing to say, and statements like these divide people. You don't have to say someone else isn't African for you to feel more African. It would only spread hate, which Adesanya has been trying to fight for so long. The fact that du Plessis is white didn't help matters, and his comments were considered racist by many people. Since then, the New Zealander has been looking to fight Dricus as soon as he can. The South African just recently made it into the top 5, and he's facing the Reaper in his next bout. Not gonna lie, it's very unlikely that he manages to get through Whitaker, but Izzy tweeted him and said, "Please win," so the champ is really looking forward to fighting him. The Kiwi said that Dricus didn't have to make any absurd comments just to get the spotlight. He would have gotten the title shot anyway. But now it's more personal, and he looks forward to putting a beating on him. It's clear that Israel is really supportive of his own people, and his relationship with other African fighters is outstanding. You guys remember the 3 African kings, right? It was a historic time in the UFC. Adesanya, Usman, and Ngannou held the undisputed titles in their weight classes, and they all rooted for each other every time one of them fought. Izzy was cheering Usman on as he dethroned Woodley to become the first African-born UFC champ, and after Adesanya won the belt at 185, there were talks of the two of them competing against one another. Both guys straight up refused to fight one another. They said they'd rather have 2 African champions than one African holding 2 belts. Kamaru refused to move up as long as a fellow African was the champ, and Izzy had the conquest of going to heavyweight for a brief period of time, but he refused to fight Francis. They even planned on having a big UFC Africa card with the 3 of them defending their belts. Imagine how big that would have been. Since then, Usman lost his title, and Ngannou vacated his belt as he left the UFC, so it probably can't happen now. But Adesanya's support has always been there for his brothers. He supported Usman through his losses and congratulated Rocky as he's also a Jamaican fighter. His fight against Jared Cannonier is the perfect example of how he likes to support fellow black athletes. Even though Jared was a contender in his division, Izzy had constantly been praising him for years. He rooted for Jared to get the title shot against himself, and the two battled it out inside the octagon. But once that was done, it was all respectful. In a way, he fought Jared because he wanted to give him some shine. So even when Adesanya has to fight a black fighter, he makes sure it's for a good cause. So from providing constant support to his fellow African fighter, to being bullied for his skin color since childhood. This was why Israel Adesanya hates fighting black people.